Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today, we welcome back to the show Academy Award-nominated composer Daniel Pemberton. He's here to discuss his latest work, the score to the box office hit Project Hail Mary. If you haven't had a chance to see the movie yet, I highly recommend getting to a Dolby Cinema where you can experience the movie in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. This was not Daniel's first foray into creating music for a science fiction space story, nor was it his first collaboration with directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. But it seems like this time he had quite a bit more room for exploration and experimentation, which ultimately led him to crafting his own orchestra using some rather unconventional instruments. If you've seen the film, you already know how incredible the results were. Here to discuss all of this and more is our regular guest host, music journalist Jon Burlingame, in conversation with composer Daniel Pemberton. Here's Jon.
Our guest today is an Oscar, Emmy, and BAFTA-nominated composer whose credits include Steve Jobs, The Trial of the Chicago 7, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, The Bad Guys, and TV's Slow Horses. He joins us from London to talk about his latest score for the box office hit Project Hail Mary. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Jon. Nice to see you.
So you previously worked with directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller on Into the Spider-Verse. Is that why they called you for this one?
That was our first official time working together, I think, on Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse. Also did some TV things with them, like After Party. They tried to get me involved in their Star Wars movie a long time ago. But I was like, I don't think that's going to fly because my friend Gareth just made Rogue One. And I was like, I'm pretty sure Lucasfilm and Disney are not going to let me do what you want to do to Star Wars. I was probably right in that aspect. But we've got a long relationship with friends as well as like professional collaborators. And this feels like a culmination of a long journey we've been together.
So how and when did you start? I'm wondering if you might have even started before production. I mean, did you read a script? Did they talk to you about the plot?
I read the script. I got involved very early on. It was a very daunting project because as a composer, there's a lot of movies out there, but a lot of them are kind of, the same thing in a way. And you can try and do something very inventive and very ambitious, but it's like actually the movie might not support that. And with this, I was very aware of like, here is the opportunity to do something very different and unusual, and take a sort of big swing, which is kind of what they were trying to do. And that's actually always quite terrifying because you're trying to build it from the ground up, like the sound. You're not going in being like, okay, I'm recording an orchestra in 3 weeks. Let's get the orchestra sounds out. I was trying to build everything from the ground, which took a huge amount of research and failure and development, and experimentation. And I think one of the earliest things we talked about was sort of wood block. The earliest thing we talked about was a wood block. Phil and Chris were very into a Steve Reich piece. There's a woodblock piece, Steve Reich. We have multiple woodblocks playing on top. And they, at one point, wanted me to score the entire film on a woodblock. And I was like, this is an amazingly crazy idea, but I know that's not going to work.
But it was inspirational, I gather.
Yeah, it was like all these things. I think with the best kind of projects are often the hardest kind of projects where you are exploring. I liken it to like being an explorer. Okay. So it's like, I don't know, if you're Christopher Columbus in 1492 or whatever, there's no map to get to America. You just got to work out how to get there. And once you've worked it out, you're like, okay, you do this. But those kind of journeys are sort of terrifying because you don't know, you've got an idea where you're trying to get to, but there's no map to get there. And musically, there was no map because we were trying to go on an adventure to somewhere new. And so I was playing around with a lot of things earlier on. I did a lot of work with steel drums, and I thought it would be very kind of exciting, but then I kind of felt maybe it wasn't. I did a lot of very kind of strange ambient electronic music, which some of that ends up in the film, and I was writing stuff that Ryan was hearing on set. So Ryan was being played early sketches of mine, and he'd have them in headphones, he'd have playlists, and they'd play him music on set, and Ryan would sometimes act with that in his earpieces.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. I mean, maybe we should sort of set the stage a little bit. This is a movie, because much of it is set in outer space. It has a sort of an epic scale, and yet much of the movie features two characters: Ryan Gosling's Earth astronaut scientist, and this extraterrestrial who he winds up collaborating with. So it's sort of this strange balance of the huge picture and a very sort of intimate story.
Yeah, I mean, that in some ways is kind of the most challenging part of this score, is how do you balance like scale or wonder of the universe with something at its core is quite intimate and really about friendship and about communication. Like, communication is a very key part of this score. And, the voice is a very big part of this score. And part of that is as a way to connect. We had this idea of like, it's humanity cheering Grace on, like everyone is there. These voices represent all of humanity, funneling through Grace. But there's another aspect to it as well, which is the way, Rocky communicates is, to start off with, it's alien. So I wanted the voice to feel both natural and alien. So there's a whole bunch of stuff which is choral work, and there's a whole bunch of stuff which is very treated electronic choral work, which again was a huge process of recording loads of ideas, making kind of electronic instruments out of them, and then working with those and then re-merging them with live performance. So you kind of don't know what's real, and also trying to work with I work with two very experimental choir groups called Shards and London Voices, and a lot of work of trying to find different ways to achieve things that could be done. Like let's say a drum machine is a good example, right? It might be something the drum machine. We'd then try and recreate that through the human voice. So, and I'd put people in a line. And we'd throw the hi-hat around the line. And that might be then doubled on a woodblock or something. And there's a huge amount of depth to the sound in this that's very subtle, that you wouldn't necessarily like strike you straight away. But that is all subconsciously to help the score feel unusual and different and give you a different feeling, hopefully.
So give me a sense of this. Were you experimenting with voices and choral sounds early on away from picture? I mean, I'm guessing that a lot of these experiments were done without, before there was any picture to look at.
Yeah. So I was working away from picture early on. The final thing you see is so unbelievably like crafted to picture. So it's not like, hey guys, here's some tracks, I'm out of here. Like every second of this film has been crafted to the frame of the movie.
But that was after months of experimentation, right?
So yeah, huge amount of experimentation early on. Finding interesting like ways to do things. The difficulty with choral work was trying to not make it sound. I never wanted it to sound like there was a bunch of people in a choir making noises in a way, but I wanted you to get the feeling of something organic. And organic is another huge part of this score, which maybe I'll come on to in a bit, but it's a very key stylistic part of how it sounds.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about that I read that you heard from Chris Miller early on was a phrase called hope core.
Yes,
what does that mean?
Hope core is a very good phrase in that it's, at its core, this is a very positive film. And it was trying to write music that was very upbeat and positive, which actually is quite hard to not make it sound cheesy, because most cool film music, let's say, is pretty minor with a few major chords in it. And it's very hard to write upbeat, optimistic music without it getting treacly and sort of cliched. And it's hard. And that for me was one of the biggest challenges from a slightly boring muso point of view, is like, how do you make these things feel cool and fresh, but have this very upbeat, positive vibe about them? Because a lot of the stuff, especially with the communicating with Rocky and the kind of playfulness between them both, you needed to feel that fun, feel that kind of connection between two, I don't want to say two people, but just a connection between two entities and the enjoyment of that.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's important to point out that the hope element of this movie is that both Ryan Gosling's character and Rocky, our extraterrestrial friend, are there to try to fix the problem of their suns slowly going dark and the possibility of the extinction of both races. So you needed the hope.
Yeah, and it's a weird, it's a difficult film, this, from a scoring perspective, because actually a lot of the time you're dealing with them. Like, so you're dealing with two people in a room basically for like 2 hours, and they're figuring stuff up. There's a lot of dialogue within those scenes, and you've got to kind of play with that and play with the playfulness, but you still got to have stuff that recognizes the scale of the situation of the universe. And, you know, we play that, but we also play a lot of the internal dance between them.
Can you talk a little bit about, you started to talk about the organics and you were talking about wood and metal sounds, and why was that important to include?
So yeah, the organic sort of nature of this score was very important to me, because I was trying to, you know, if we look at like life on this planet or life in a different planet, or, you know, the story of this film, you know, in some ways people say there's no baddie in this film, but there kind of is a baddie, which is this astrophage, which is eating this, you know, and that's, you know, we're all told baddies are people in capes or something. But what's interesting about this is actually just looking at the universe on a cellular organic level. And I wanted something that connected you, the audience, to this, the complexity of the universe. And I wanted it to feel in some ways alien, in that I didn't want to use an orchestra, even though I did. I didn't want it to feel orchestral traditionally, because you've already got prejudices in your mind about what that is, and you're already seeing a bunch of people in a room playing instruments. And I wanted sounds that connected you to the textures around you in the world, whether that's water, wood, glass, steel, metal, earth. In fact, one of the first the first noise I kind of created for this film, which is kind of quite funny, and was a squeaky tap. There's a joke that this score's got everything except the kitchen sink, but does have a squeaky tap.
You mean a water tap?
So I was staying at a friend's house. I'm going to try and find it on my iPhone. I was staying at a friend's house who has a big house in the countryside, a very old house. And I went to the bathroom in the top floor and I turned the tap on, and it just made this insanely kind of unpleasant squeaky noise. And what happened when that happens? I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. So I then recorded it on my iPhone. So this is, I don't know how well you can hear this. That's a bit of the water coming out. And there's a squeaky tap. So you can hear it like playing, right? And what's interesting, it's a very interesting tone because it's got, I'll stop it now, but it's got it's like all these pipes, like metal and water trying to like adjust, but it had a very pure tone. So I turned that into an instrument, bunch of instruments. And that actually became a very key part to how I started writing. And the first things I wrote were all literally just that squeaky tap that had been, sampled, turned into an instrument. Later, I started looking at like, well, how can I like double that and sort of create a similar sound? So started using a lot of like very interesting instruments like the crystal bache, glass harmonica, Ons Martineau, and things like that. So crystal bache probably the most, which is you probably know it, but it's a instrument from the sort of 40s or 50s that's kind of quite rare, and it's a bunch of like glass rods that you play with wet fingers. And so that touch of water against glass going through metal creates something very interesting. And so I'm using that, and then I'm using things like the sampled squeaky tap. I'm using actual water. We use like bowls of water. We played water. We're using touch. A human body, again, is a big thing. We got a whole class of school kids to play body percussion.
What exactly is body percussion?
So we got 30 school kids in from Wells Cathedral School, which has a percussion course. And I kind of like the idea of getting school kids in just because, Grace is a teacher. So I like this idea of bringing kids from school into the score. And we got them at Abbey Road, and we got them stomping, like clapping, playing their bodies, playing their knees. Knee slaps are very good, even better than actual claps, more precision. And they are all over the score. And, it's a big part of the score is the percussive elements. A lot of that is just the human body, like stamping and clapping. It was trying to find as many different unusual ways to create the score. And in fact, tell you what I'll do is this is the sound, by the way. I just open Logic. I don't know if you can hear this, but this is, so that's a squeaky tap you heard earlier. So you can kind of hear how it's like this is just like one sample slowed down, but and so that kind of thing of like developing all your own sounds and developing all your own, I call it like mixing your own paints. You basically spend a long time mixing paint color rather than buying it off the shelf. And that's how you get, stuff that feels, very original. Like this sound is like a, So this is a big sound in it, which is like, so again, that's from like early sort of processes of a lot of experiment. And I've got millions of these, and most of them don't work. And you spend ages when you experiment, when you have time to fail, you have time to create. Hopefully there'll be something in there that will work. So there's huge amounts of this score that you don't know exist, don't hear, to get us to this point of the film.
So we've been talking about wood and metal and human percussion and choral sounds. Was much of this, after you recorded it, then processed electronically?
No, I tried to, there was electronic processing at the beginning of taking some sounds. You know, this is a good example, right? So let's see if this is, I'm trying to think if this is let me try and find you one that's like, so yeah, there's some which, for instance, where I spent a long time recording vocals and putting them into custom engines that I built with. I got a great assistant called Alex. He helps me build sample engines because he's much better at it than I am now. And we spent a long time trying to work out sounds that are like playable. And they all have in the same way in orchestra, you know, like a piccolo can do one thing really well, but something else not very well. Similar with a tuba. Tuba can do something great down here, but terrible for fast things. And you're kind of building your own orchestra out of very disparate elements.
So what you're doing here is trying to create a soundscape that is, in one sense, connecting with us as an audience, but in another sense is kind of foreign to our ears. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm trying to make basically, like if you look at the orchestra is an amazing device of instruments that over time people have worked out these things go together really well. And these are the rules of the orchestra. And the orchestra is like, in some ways, the greatest instrument, let's say, ever invented. What I'm trying to do is kind of like work out a different orchestra, which maybe is not the greatest instrument ever invented, but is a instrument. And so you're trying to find all these devices within it that gives you a very unique soundscape and a limitation to how you write, which forces you to do things differently. And so with that, I'm creating a lot of things. I'm recording, let's say, live stuff. I'm electronically treating some of that to allow me to create a new sound that's different. And then some of that I'm using as electronics of organic material. And the other stuff I'm just recording on top. And it's a very long process. But it means you get something different because you're exploring in sound early on, and then when you get to the end you're trying to recreate things that almost you wouldn't, if you were writing, you wouldn't recreate because you wouldn't think of writing that way. But the processing, it's not electronic processing, you're making these instruments that force you into a different way. And we'd find sometimes that this stuff was impossible. We couldn't get the singers to sing what I'd done because it is too complicated or too weird or too high pitched. And so you then make these calls about, okay, we'll use some of this and some of that. And that molding of all these different elements of live, electronic, like sampled and into one sort of piece is kind of what makes it sort of feel different. And I want it to feel different to the audience because I feel the best way to get a strong reaction is, the strongest reaction is through something new. Every time you experience something new for the first time, the reaction is incredibly visceral. And through those processes, things come out which we know work really well. And so you kind of go, oh, that works really well. That gives me that reaction. But as a film composer, you can always lean on those tricks, which are, I know how to get the emotion this way and that way. And as the audience, they work with the audience, but they don't work in the way that when they're hearing something they've never heard, which I succeed sometimes in this film, other bits don't, because you're still balancing, trying to get emotion and trying to get story in. But the goal is always trying to create something new. So it's a new experience for the audience. Like the whole bit when he's flying around, the erratic maneuver, sort of sequence, that's scored very differently to how people would expect that to be. And I think some people see it for the first time, they're like, what the hell is going on? But I kind of want people to be like, what the hell is going on here? That's a lot of wood blocks. So it's like a ton of wood blocks. And then we've got choirs going, bah, but those choirs are then doubled on like a bunch of woodwind. There's like a lot of steel drum in there as well. There's a sort of circular motif that's played on choir and on crystal bache. So there's a lot of disparate elements in there. So you don't really know what it is, but it sort of does something for you, hopefully. Because for me, that's what keeps me excited about doing film music, is it's actually an amazingly creative outlet for creative music writing. And when you have that opportunity to be that creative, you've got to take it, which this movie for me was that. It's like an amazing outlet of creativity. And working with Phil and Chris, they really encourage that.
Before we leave the subject of choir, I wanted to ask you, are they ever actually singing words?
Yeah, there's words all the way through this, but there's no word with any like strong meaning in this. Like I literally went for what phonetically felt interesting.
So you created words or phrases for them to sing, but that wouldn't mean anything to us?
Yeah, I didn't want it to be, again, like one of the other things of this is I didn't want to come to it from a Western viewpoint. I tried, the universe is incredibly wide. It's not just, Western countries. And what was important was like the music trying to do that, which sometimes it succeeded, sometimes I didn't. But I tried to, if it ended up getting something that I felt connected you to a certain place, I didn't really want to do that. And sometimes we do. There's some things where I think, I'd have liked that to work differently, but every film, you get to the end, you're like, well, I could have done that differently.
So what about Phil and Chris? Did you bring them into this process while you were experimenting? Did you get feedback from them about what you were trying or what you were after?
Yeah, got feedback. Let's just say I got a lot of feedback. Yeah, so the process with them is very unique. And very all-encompassing. Like I take over your entire life to finish this film. But they're all striving to make great cinema, and I love that. When anyone's making films is a very tough process, especially if you're trying to change the rule book. So I would be writing stuff that was being played on set to Ryan, as I said earlier. And then I'd be writing stuff here in my home, which is very messy and not what you'd expect a fancy Hollywood studio to look like. It is kind of a tip. But for some reason, I like writing here and I feel comfortable writing here. Then I moved to LA and I ended up setting up my studio in a room next to the edit suite where I worked pretty much every day round the clock on stuff. And they would come in from next door, look at stuff. We'd talk about it. They'd disappear. I'd work more. And we tried, like every scene in this movie has probably been like kicked around multiple times, multiple different approaches, multiple different ways of doing it. So it's a very, very in-depth scoring process, let's say. Yeah, but very, they are super, they were literally in the office next to me for a huge chunk of this process.
I did want to ask you, we haven't talked about themes in any traditional sense. Did you feel like you needed a theme for Ryan's character or a theme or a musical sound for Rocky's character? Or didn't that come into play here?
Yeah, I mean, this film has a bunch of thematic motifs and ideas within it. It doesn't have, I don't think, the traditional, I don't want to say old-fashioned because that sounds derogatory, but it doesn't have the old-fashioned big Hollywood theme of here's a heroic moment. But we have a bunch of motifs and smaller themes that I think connect to stuff, but they're in some ways they're a bit more abstract. So there's one which is kind of like a sort of, I call it a life/death one, which is the sort of choral piece that goes. There's this kind of up-down voice piece which connects all through the film. There's a lot of stuff to do with Rocky, like the sounds that start coming into the score when Rocky appears, which is again the more treated vocals. So those kind of treated electronic vocals are held back until we really meet Rocky, and because Rocky brings an alien form of communication, an alien aspect to the score, but before that it doesn't exist. So there's a lot of ideas that are like a bit more subtle about how they come in, but that's a big one. There is a whole bunch of different themes within this, like when Grace goes home. That's a theme you've heard a lot before, but it's a strange film in that it doesn't have the conventional I don't say Hollywood, but like it's an unconventional film, which is kind of why I think people are connecting with it in a way. And the score had to jump on that train as well. And so we did try things that were like these big thematic moments, but it didn't feel right. It sort of started stepping on the journey of the film. And I think what's interesting about the reaction to this film, which so far has been very, very positive, is, the experience of this film, the music is a very, very big part of that. And part of that is like that journey through it, and not stepping too much in certain moments and being really huge in certain moments as well. And again, that's a huge part of the process of making this movie, of like trying to work out, where do we go big? Where do we hold back? Where can we be light? Where do we have to, inject some pathos? And yeah. So yeah, basically it's a very long way of saying there are a bunch of themes in there, but not in the way you'd expect.
So one of the interesting things that I was fascinated by was when Ryan and Rocky are learning to talk to each other, to actually communicate. Yeah. I felt that your score was helping us understand what was going on there. Can you talk a little bit about those scenes?
Yeah, so that was a big thing of trying to create ideas within the score of kind of call and response, which is Grace saying one thing, Rocky saying one thing. And so you have a lot of these motifs which are answering each other backwards and forwards. And they start at a certain speed and they build up. And it's subtle because I don't want to overshadow what's happening on screen, but there's a lot of reinforcement going on with the score that helps you understand these moments. And again, using vocals that are less recognizable, which is this sort of treated electronic vocal mixed with a real vocal, that helps Rocky feel unusual and strange, because Rocky is, but you still can connect with him, even though he's a life form from a different planet that we've never heard of. And I didn't want his voice. I didn't want suddenly like a soprano singing for Rocky, because you're like, well, are there a bunch of sopranos on Arid? I don't think so. I mean, there might be, but are they going to sound exactly the same as a bunch of sopranos on Earth? Probably not. And even like, let's say using a soprano, use this great soprano called Grace Davison. She's got an amazing voice, very pure, and you hear it a bunch. But even then, I'm often trying to double that up with like an Ons Martineau, very subtly behind her voice, to create something unexpected. So you don't 100% know what it is.
There's some fairly intense scenes kind of late in the film, like, for example, when Ryan's character is injured. And I don't want to give too much away for people who haven't seen it, but it's
a fishing trip.
Yes, exactly. It's a fascinating sequence, and I'm wondering how you handled those.
So that sequence is obviously quite a big dramatic part of the film, and what I like about that sequence is it goes back to our very first conversation on this film, which was like, can you do the whole film on a wood block? And I was like, no, but I can start the entire biggest sequence of the movie on a wood block. So that sequence starts with a single wood block. And again, just going back to themes, some of these things are thematic ideas, but not in the conventional way of here's a big melody, but like even just donk, 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 the wood block. Donk, donk, donk. That has been played elsewhere. And that starts off a rhythm and it just builds and builds and builds. It starts on one wood block, another wood block enters, and then all this other stuff enters, and it just builds and builds and builds. And what was really key for me for that sequence is once it starts, it never lets you go. So it's relentless. It's kind of repetitive. But it's repetitive with a thing where it's just changing and building and growing, and it feels organic. Everything in there feels sort of like connected, but you don't really know what it is. There's so much stuff in that cue. So many things that are on top of each other, which you wouldn't know. Like there's like electric cello, brass, strings just doing this low, and voices. And there's voices doing things you'd never know it's a voice because it's doubled on a bunch of other instruments like guitars but none of them sound like they're supposed to. And it's really about locking the audience in to the sequence of just the tension in that sequence is from the music, because the music never lets you go. It just keeps on ratcheting up. So when you're watching it, you're like, I need this to end. And it's only when he gets back on the ship do we actually change key, and then we introduce this whole new like language towards the end of it. And that gives you hope, but also with a sense of trepidation. And that was a hugely long process to craft that sequence. So much work went into it. And it's been great to see how it's, how people have reacted to it. Actually, one of the other things I did, I went to a place in LA called LA Percussion that has a huge warehouse out in the middle of nowhere. I spent a day recording all their weird instruments for that sequence. So like there's a thing called aqualung, I can't pronounce it. But basically they had an amazing array of crazy percussion, and so much of that is thrown into that piece.
And a lot of that percussion is sort of world music stuff, right? From out, thousands of miles away from Los Angeles.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is trying to pull all these different ingredients in, and again, trying to keep it connected to the universe and not just to the Western way of music creation, which, it's the world I come from. So that's always going to seep in some ways. But the more I can pull on things you don't know what they are, the more it takes it away from sort of musical prejudice that you have.
And it was interesting that you mentioned that you actually did use traditional orchestra, but perhaps in unconventional ways.
Yeah, I mean, the orchestra is still a huge part of this score, and a very important part. And I think my work with the orchestra is I look at the orchestra as an instrument alongside these other instruments, and I don't necessarily give it the status that has traditionally been afforded the orchestra. I'd say the orchestra is, as I say, kind of one of the most amazing music devices that we know. It's hugely powerful, it's hugely emotional, it's hugely nimble. But it's also hugely expensive. And there's a thing where I've definitely over the years learned that money is not important in terms of creating work. So if something costs a lot of money, it doesn't mean it's better. It can be fantastic, and there's a reason it costs lots of money, because it's amazing. But you shouldn't prioritize all your decision making on what something costs. It's the same to director. They might have a scene that cost, some huge scene that cost a fortune, but the thing that's really going to connect with you is like the one shot of some guy making a joke, and that's going to make the whole thing different. And I sort of look at music for film in a way of like, well, how do I achieve the most exciting experience? And I feel with orchestral writing, a lot has already been done very, very well by a lot of much more talented composers than me. And so the only way I can do something interesting is do something stupid that no one's done before, because no one's done it. So it means I'll be the best at the score with a squeaky tap and 5 wood blocks and an orchestra. But the orchestra adds a weight and a power which is phenomenal and really makes a huge difference to this score. So for me, it was trying to find ways to disguise aspects of the orchestra that you're used to. Because I during the process, I'd write things and we'd try writing big string lines and things that were quite melodic. And actually, as soon as I heard them, for me, it changed my relationship with the picture and the movie. And it started to feel like something that I had experienced or heard before. And it might be more catchy, but it started to change your experience of the movie, because you were like hearing this stuff that was telling you this is movie music. And what I really want you to be doing when you're watching this movie is just feeling it, and not really thinking subconsciously this reminds you of something James Horner did or John Williams. I want you to watch it and be like, I don't know what this is.
And I felt that over and over again. Okay. I kept thinking, what is this? What am I listening to? What did he do here? I did want to ask you, we've talked about all these fascinating elements that you've drawn on, and I'm wondering, how complicated was it to mix this score?
This is probably the most complicated, exhausting, time-consuming film I've ever done in my life, because it was so many elements. It was so complicated to mix. I got to the stage where I was so tired, I literally fell asleep in the studio during a session, and they wrapped me up in blankets because my brain had to compute with so much, because I'm doing so much stuff where I don't know if it's going to work. So we went to recording. There's a whole bunch of things I'm like, this is going to work fine. Great. There's a whole bunch of stuff I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. It might not work. And a bunch of it didn't. And I would work out fail safe, so, the movie's not screwed. But you're having to make huge amounts of judgment to see like how far can I tweak something. So many layers, and a great example is just the wood blocks, right? I record these wood blocks, they sound great. But then I'm like, I just missed something else. So we recorded me tapping the wooden floor air on every single hit with 2 hands to just add a different level of human touch to the wood block. But it meant it was a nightmare to mix. I have an amazing, incredibly tolerant, incredibly talented mixer called Sam McKell, who embraces all my ridiculous ideas, like let me lie on the floor of Air Studios and tap the floor for 7 minutes, and you've got to get it all tight and make it all hit everything. Or like, let's get some bowls of water from the canteen and we're going to just slap them in time with this beat. I mean, there was a whole bit where we were going to record me in the bath, which luckily we didn't do. But it was incredibly complicated because a traditional score, right, you might, even if you're stripping it out, you might do strings, brass, and percussion, and it's going to sound great. And you can do a big brass thing, and it's going to sound fantastic. And you've got 20 horns or whatever. Probably don't have 20 horns, but you know what I mean. But 20-piece brass section, blasting away, it sounds fantastic. And you record it, and it sounds great. With this, we're trying to do things where I'm making it sort of annoyingly complicated, where we don't know how we're going to get the scale of like 20 brass without using 20 brass. Like we can use the low end of crystal bache and we can double it with this cello thing. And it was a very tricky film to mix. Very, very tricky. But anyway, we got there and I'm very pleased with the results. But it's nice. It'd be nice to do. I just want to do a straightforward film score one day. I don't really.
So I wanted to ask you, how long did all this take? Were you on this film for months or a year?
I was on it for like 2 years. So I came on when they started shooting. I was writing stuff. I wasn't like on it full on for 2 years. And the thing about that time is it allows me lots of time to experiment, lots of time to fail. But then by the end, it becomes this crazy, like, you've got to keep your wits about you and just get the film done because they're changing stuff. Deadlines are coming. And you're also trying to grapple with a recording process that is unknown to you and to everyone else and the studio luckily were very supportive. Amazon MGM were great because it's, you're not like, I need 3 days on orchestra and 4 days to mix. It's like, no, I don't know how this is going to play out. And you just got to trust me that I'll make it sound good. It's like I said, it's like being Christopher Columbus or like an explorer where you're like, well, I think there's something over there. Just trust me. I'm going to try and get there and find it, and we'll try not to all die in the process.
Well, you did find it, and it is extraordinary. And this is not just the biggest opening of the year, but I think it's the most creative and original work maybe that you've ever done in films. It's really kind of extraordinary, and I'm happy to say that because I walked out of this movie saying, "Wow, hadn't heard anything like that before."
Oh, good. Well, I think another thing we were also very conscious of doing this movie is there hasn't been a lot of like big scale, ambitious Hollywood films that are original and aren't franchise, that aren't sequels. And I, through my career, I've basically decided sort of to stay away from sequels or franchise movies unless I have an opportunity to do something very creative and original. And because I think the people who go to movies, I talk to myself here, I want to see something new. I want to experience something new. I want a surprise. Surprise for me is everything. Like, I don't know what I'm going to get. Like, sometimes you want to go in the movie and you know exactly what you're going to get. And that's what some people want. And I want that sometimes, but actually to go where you don't know what you're going to see, don't know what you're going to hear, and it's exciting, that's the best. And I think what's most gratifying about the sort of box office of this movie is it shows that there's a lot of people like that. And, you get a lot of individual artists and talents all working together to make something original. And actually that can be very successful. And that's what people want. So hopefully studios will, start support, putting, it's easy to support it when they see some money behind it.
Okay. So last question.
Yeah.
Have you started working with Lord and Miller on Beyond the Spider-Verse?
Don't ask me about Spider-Verse 3. I can't talk about Spider-Verse 3. So yeah, Spider-Verse 3 I can't talk about. But I can tell you what I am working on. I've just done another film called The Drama with Zendaya, Robert Pattinson. To give you an example of the extremity of these two scores, I think I spent like probably 2 months just recording Project Hail Mary. I don't even know I'm making that number up, but that would feel about right. And probably another 2 months mixing it. The Drama, I recorded the entire score in 4 hours, and I went to the pub for the first time after finishing a film, which was amazing. The Drama is an incredibly minimal score, but still effective for the film, I hope. It's a different film, needs a different kind of score. Project Hail Mary, hugely, massively complicated score. The drama, very simple, minimal score with only three flutes and nothing else. And then I'm just working on the Masters of the Universe He-Man movie, which I'm just finishing at the moment, which is a huge ton of fun. And I've gone back to the ridiculously complicated, too many cooks in the score type approach. But that is also a movie I'm very excited for people to hear, because it is a huge, it's just really fun.
Well, we are so glad that you could spend some time with us today talking about Project Hail Mary. Thanks for your time today, and look forward to everything you do from here on. And thank you, Daniel Pemberton.
Thank you, Jon.
Many thanks to Daniel for joining us on Dolby Creator Talks today, and thanks to Jon Burlingame for conducting yet another excellent interview. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Amazon MGM Studios for helping put this conversation together. Be sure to check out Project Hail Mary, now in theaters and Dolby Cinemas in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. We'll have links, as always, in our show notes. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, be sure you're subscribed to us here at Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Kahn. Thanks for joining us.